The rain poured relentlessly, drenching the forest floor and muffling the sounds of nocturnal creatures that usually roamed the area. In the midst of the downpour, 6 men huddled beneath the crumbling remains of an old stone shelter. The structure, forgotten by time, offered minimal protection, but it was better than nothing. Elliot Reed, the self-appointed leader, paced in the narrow space. His sharp features were illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning, revealing a man worn by responsibility. "We can't stay here forever," he said, his voice cutting through the drumming rain. "We're not exactly spoilt for choices, are we?" grumbled Jasper, a burly man with a beard that seemed to have its own weather system. He leaned against a mossy pillar, arms crossed. "Elliot's right," muttered Nolan, the youngest of the group. His thin frame shivered, not just from the cold, but from fear. "If they find us here—" "They won't," interrupted Marcus, a wiry man with sharp eyes that constantly darted toward the forest. "We've covered our tracks well enough." "If they're as clever as they seem, it won't matter," said Tobias, a scholar whose glasses fogged with each breath. His tone carried the weight of someone who had long accepted the worst. Elliot stopped pacing and looked at the 6th man, who had yet to speak. Graham, a quiet, brooding figure, sat apart from the others, his back against the wall, sharpening a blade. His silence was unnerving, but his competence was undeniable. "We'll decide before dawn," Elliot said. "For now, we rest." A shared past. The 6 men hadn't arrived at this desolate refuge by chance. Each had been part of a grand expedition to uncover the secrets of Black Veil Forest, a place shrouded in mystery and rumored to harbor treasures from a forgotten civilization. But what had begun as a scholarly pursuit turned into a nightmare. 3 weeks ago, they had entered the forest with a team of 12. Their guides vanished first, then, one by one, their comrades disappeared, leaving behind only chilling signs of struggle, shredded tents, broken tools, and worst of all, no footprints leading away. By the 2nd week, only the 6 of them remained. Fear turned to paranoia, and survival became their sole priority. Whatever was stalking them, it was relentless, intelligent, and wholly unseen. The plan. The rain finally stopped in the early hours of the morning, leaving the forest shrouded in mist. Elliot gathered the group. "We need to make it to the ruins marked on the map," he said, holding up a damp, creased parchment. "If the legends are true, there's a sanctuary there. We'll be safe." "If the legends are true," Jasper echoed mockingly. "You're betting our lives on fairy tales." "We don't have a better option," Tobias said. "The ruins are the only place left unsearched, and they're close, half a day's hike at most." "Close doesn't mean easy," Marcus muttered. "Not with whatever's out there." Elliot ignored him. "We move as one. No one strays from the group, no matter what." He locked eyes with each man. "Understood?" There were reluctant nods all around. Did the mist. The forest was unnervingly quiet as they trekked through the dense underbrush. The usual cacophony of birds and insects was absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to press against their ears. "Feels like we're being watched," Nolan whispered, his grip tightening on a makeshift spear. "We are," Graham said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Jasper scoffed. "Thanks for the morale boost." Elliot shot them a warning glance. "Stay focused." Hours passed with no sign of danger, but the tension only grew. Every crack of a twig, every gust of wind sent a ripple of unease through the group. The signal. As they neared the marked location, they found a strange structure, a stone obelisk standing alone in a clearing. Its surface was covered in cryptic symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. "What is this?" Tobias asked, his scholarly curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "It's a marker," Marcus said. "Or a warning." Let's not wait to find out, Elliot said. We keep moving. But as they stepped past the obelisk, a low, guttural sound echoed through the forest. It was unlike anything they had ever heard, a blend of growls, clicks, and something disturbingly human. Run, Graham said, his voice as calm as if he were suggesting dinner plans. The group didn't need to be told twice. The chase. The men sprinted through the forest, their lungs burning and their legs screaming for rest. The sound of pursuit was close behind, branches snapping and underbrush rustling as something massive closed in. "Don't look back!" Elliot shouted, though he could feel the weight of whatever was chasing them pressing against his mind. Nolan stumbled, crying out as his ankle twisted. Jasper grabbed him, practically dragging the younger man forward. "Keep going!" he roared. The trees began to thin, and the ruins came into view, a sprawling complex of weathered stone, half buried by time and foliage. "There!" Tobias yelled, his voice cracking. Sanctuary or trap? They burst into the ruins, collapsing onto the moss-covered floor. For a moment there was silence, save for their ragged breathing. "Did we lose it?" Marcus asked, his eyes wide. No one answered. The ruins were vast, with towering columns and archways that led to shadowy corridors. Despite their relief, the air here felt heavy, as though the stones themselves bore witness to countless tragedies. Tobias examined the carvings on the nearest wall, his academic instincts returning. "These symbols, they're a language," he said, tracing a line of glyphs, "but I don't recognize it." "Can you figure out what they say?" Elliot asked. "Maybe. Give me time." "We don't have time," Graham said. "This place isn't safe. It's just quieter than the forest." The price of knowledge. As Tobias worked, the others scouted the area. Jasper and Marcus found a chamber with a well at its center. The water was unnaturally clear, and the walls were adorned with murals depicting figures standing before an enormous beast. "Looks like a story," Marcus said, "but I don't like how it ends." In the murals, the figures were shown kneeling before the beast, their heads bowed. In the final panel, only the beast remained. Back in the main hall, Tobias let out a triumphant cry. "I've got it! The inscription! The price of sanctuary is a soul freely given." The group froze. "What does that mean?" Nolan asked, though he already knew the answer. "It means one of us has to stay behind," Tobias said, his voice trembling, "to offer themselves." The decision. The room descended into chaos. Accusations and arguments flew as each man tried to avoid the inevitable. "We didn't come this far to die here," Jasper shouted. "And we won't all die," Elliot said. "Just one." "That's easy for you to say," Marcus snapped. "You're the one calling the shots." "I'll do it," Graham said quietly. The group turned to him, stunned. "What?" Elliot asked, his voice softening. "I'll stay," Graham repeated. He stood, his expression unreadable. "I've been running from my past long enough. Maybe this is how I make it right." Before anyone could protest, Graham walked to the center of the chamber and knelt. The air grew thick, and the ground trembled as an otherworldly light enveloped him. The aftermath. The ruins fell silent once more. The remaining men stood in stunned silence, the weight of Graham's sacrifice sinking in. "We have to go," Elliot said finally, his voice heavy with grief. "He gave us a chance. Let's not waste it." As they left the ruins, the forest seemed to part before them, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. By the time they reached the edge of the woods, the sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the landscape. But none of them felt victorious. A changed fate. Years later, each man would reflect on that fateful journey. Elliot became a leader in his community, his decisions always tempered by the memory of those he had lost. Tobias devoted his life to studying ancient languages, driven by the mystery of the ruins. Jasper Marcus and Nolan lived quieter lives, their bond forged in the fires of survival. And Graham? His story became legend, whispered among those who dared to explore the forest. Some claimed to see a figure watching over the ruins, a silent guardian ensuring that no one else would pay the price he had. The forest remained, its secrets intact, and the men who survived carried its mark forever. The outpost stood at the edge of the known world, a relic of a bygone era. It was built long before anyone remembered why, a fortress of stone and steel rising from the barren plains, weathered but unyielding. Its purpose had faded into obscurity, but for the 5 men stationed there, it had become a prison of their own making. Captain Abram Hensley, the stoic leader of the group, sat at a wooden table in the dimly lit mess hall. His rugged face bore the weight of countless decisions, most of them thankless. Around him were his men: Corbin, the fiery engineer; Desmond, the meditative sharpshooter; Fletcher, the grizzled quartermaster; and Elias, the youngest of them, who still clung to hope like a lifeline. "Another day," Abram muttered, staring at the daily logbook. "Another day of nothing," Corbin replied, leaning back in his chair. "How long are we supposed to hold out here? There's nothing for miles but dust and silence." "Protocol says we remain until relieved," Fletcher said, his gravelly voice steady. He was polishing a bayonet, his hands working out of habit rather than necessity. "Relieved by who?" Elias asked. "The world out there doesn't even remember we exist." Desmond, who rarely spoke unless necessary, sipped his coffee and gestured toward the watchtower window. "Something's out there." The room fell silent. The signal. Elias scrambled up the ladder to the watchtower, his boots clanging against the metal rungs. The others followed, crowding into the small space. Desmond handed Abram a pair of binoculars and pointed toward the horizon. "There," he said. Abram adjusted the lenses and squinted. In the distance, a faint light blinked in irregular patterns. It wasn't natural. "Could be a signal," he said. "Or a trap," Fletcher added. "Why would anyone come here?" Corbin asked. "That's what we're going to find out," Abram said, lowering the binoculars. The expedition. By sunrise, the group was packed and ready to investigate. The outpost gates groaned as they opened, and the men stepped into the wasteland beyond. The air was dry, and the wind carried a faint metallic tang, a constant reminder of the desolation surrounding them. Desmond took point, his rifle slung across his back, while Fletcher brought up the rear with a pack of supplies. Abram carried the map, though it was more of a symbolic gesture. There were no landmarks to navigate by. Hours passed as they trekked toward the light's origin. The ground beneath them shifted from cracked earth to loose gravel, then to a strange, glassy terrain that glimmered under the sun. "What is this place?" Elias asked, his voice tinged with awe. "No one knows," Abram replied. "It's been abandoned for centuries. Some say it was a battlefield. Others think it was a city destroyed by its own greed. And what do you think?" Abram paused. "I think it doesn't matter. We're here now." The machine. The blinking light led them to a structure half buried in the ground, a twisted amalgamation of metal and stone. It looked ancient and alien, yet it pulsed with energy, as though alive. "What in the world?" Corbin muttered, stepping closer. "Don't touch it," Fletcher warned. "I'm not an idiot," Corbin snapped, though his curiosity was palpable. Abram circled the structure, examining its details. Symbols etched into the surface seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, making them impossible to decipher. "It's some kind of machine," Corbin said, kneeling to inspect a panel. "Looks like it's been dormant for ages, but something's reactivated it." "Reactivated by who?" Elias asked. "Or what?" Fletcher added grimly. "Stay alert," Abram said. "This could be what sent the signal." The stranger. As they debated their next move, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was gaunt, his face obscured by a hood, and his movements deliberate. The men raised their weapons instinctively. "Stop right there!" Abram commanded. The figure complied, raising his hands slowly. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice hoarse but calm. "I am called Darius. I've been waiting for you." "Waiting for us?" Corbin said incredulously. "Yes, for men like you." Abram narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Darius pointed to the machine. "This device is ancient, but its purpose is clear: to protect or destroy. It was dormant until recently, but something disturbed it. If left unchecked, it will consume everything." "How do you know all this?" Fletcher asked. "I was a guardian, long ago," Darius said, "when this land was whole." "Convenient," Corbin muttered. Abram considered the stranger's words. "If what you're saying is true, how do we stop it?" Darius gestured toward the machine. "You don't. It's too late for that." The revelation. Darius led them deeper into the structure, through narrow corridors lit by an eerie, pulsating glow. The air grew heavier with each step, as though the walls themselves were pressing inward. In the heart of the machine, they found a massive chamber dominated by a swirling vortex of energy. It roared like a storm, its light casting long, jagged shadows. "This is the core," Darius said. "It feeds on life. The longer it remains active, the more powerful it becomes." "And how do we shut it down?" Abram asked. Darius hesitated. "One of you must enter the core and sever its connection manually, but it's a one-way trip." The men exchanged uneasy glances. "There's always a catch," Corbin said bitterly. "This is madness," Elias said. "We came here to survive, not to die for something we barely understand." "Survival isn't always about staying alive," Abram said quietly. The decision. Abram stepped forward, his expression resolute. "No," Fletcher said, stepping in front of him. "You're the one keeping us together. If anyone should do it, it's me." "You're not expendable," Abram replied. "And you are," Fletcher shot back. "Stop," Desmond said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We're wasting time. Let's draw straws." "Are you serious?" Corbin asked. "Do you have a better idea?" Reluctantly, the group agreed. They broke a branch into uneven pieces and let fate decide. Elias drew the shortest straw. "The sacrifice." "No," Elias said, shaking his head. "It can't be me." "Elias," Abram began. "No!" Elias shouted, tears streaming down his face. "I can't do it. I'm not strong enough." Abram placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are, and you won't be alone." The group rallied around Elias, offering words of comfort and encouragement. Darius prepared him for the task, explaining the sequence of steps required to sever the core's connection. As Elias approached the vortex, he turned to his comrades one last time. "Don't forget me." "We won't," Abram promised. Elias stepped into the light. The vortex flared brilliantly, then collapsed into itself, leaving the chamber in total silence. The aftermath. The machine was dead, its ominous glow extinguished. The air felt lighter, as though the world itself had sighed in relief. Darius, his task complete, vanished without a word. The remaining men returned to the outpost, their hearts heavy with loss but fortified by Elias's bravery. A legacy. Years later, the outpost was decommissioned, its purpose forgotten once more. But in the hearts of the men who had served there, it remained a symbol of sacrifice and resilience. Abram often visited the site, standing where the gates once stood and remembering the boy who became a hero. And though the world would never know Elias's name, his courage echoed in the silence of the wasteland, a reminder that even in the face of the unknown, humanity could endure.